The rain came down in sheets, loud enough to drown out the sirens, loud enough to hide fear. It slammed against the windshield of the armored van as it skidded through a narrow service road behind the capital's judicial complex. Somewhere ahead, a gate screeched open. Somewhere behind, engines roared closer. In the back of the van, Captain Elias Ward braced himself, one hand gripping a steel rail, the other hovering near a radio that had gone dead 30 seconds ago. He checked his watch. 02:17 a.m. The judge was screaming. "Stop the vehicle!" The man cried, his voice cracking, hands bound, eyes darting to the red emergency lights bouncing across the ceiling. "You don't understand what you're doing." Elias didn't answer. He kept his eyes forward, jaw locked, rain streaking down the glass like tears. He'd already crossed the line. There was no going back. A sudden burst of light flooded the road ahead. The van swerved, tires screamed. Elias felt the impact before he heard it, the crunch of metal, the violent shudder, the world lurching sideways. The engine stalled. Silence hit hard, broken only by rain and the judge's sobs. Elias opened his door and stepped into the storm. On the rooftop across the courtyard, a shadow moved. Then another, and another. Red dots appeared. One on the judge's chest, one on the hood of the van, one on Elias's shoulder. He raised his hands slowly, rain soaking his uniform, breath steady. He looked up at the darkness and said quietly, "If you're here to kill me, do it. But if you're here for the truth, then listen." For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the dots vanished, and the night exhaled. Before we go any further, take a second. What time is it where you're watching from? Which country are you in right now? Let me know in the comments. And if stories about courage, power, and truth matter to you, hit like and subscribe. This channel is about the moments history almost buried, and the people who refused to stay silent. Months earlier, Elias Ward was just another captain with mud on his boots, and a name that meant nothing outside his unit. He had spent the better part of a year rotating between checkpoints and forward bases, in a country most Americans couldn't find on a map. He wasn't chasing medals. He wasn't chasing politics. He believed, naively some would say, in the idea that rules mattered, that lines existed for a reason. The case that brought him back to the capital was supposed to be routine. A financier accused of laundering money through shell companies, money that funded weapons shipments and paid bribes at border crossings. The evidence was airtight: bank records, intercepted calls, testimony from a driver who'd flipped. Elias was a witness because he'd led the operation that seized the accounts. Open and shut. That's what everyone said. The courthouse smelled like bleach and old paper. White corridors, polished floors, portraits of retired judges lining the walls like saints. Elias walked alone, boots echoing, shoulders squared. He wasn't nervous, he was alert. There's a difference soldiers learn early. As he approached the chambers of Senior Justice Roland Hale, something felt wrong. The corridor was empty. No clerks, no guards. The air carried an expensive cologne that didn't belong in a government building. The door was ajar. Elias slowed. He told himself to keep walking. He told himself it wasn't his business, but training has a way of overruling comfort. He leaned closer, just enough to hear voices over the rain tapping the windows. "The arrangement is simple," a smooth voice said. "Insufficient evidence. Case dismissed." "And my end?" the judge asked. "Taken care of," the voice replied. "The property transfer is already in motion. Southern coast. Quiet." Elias's chest tightened. He saw the envelope through the crack in the door. Thick, brown, heavy with promise. Justice Hale opened it with a practiced calm, fingers steady, eyes bright. Inside, foreign currency, neatly stacked. "Done," the judge said. "Tell your client he goes home tonight." Elias stepped back, heart pounding, a heat rising behind his eyes. Blood money. Money meant to rebuild villages, to compensate families, money that would now disappear into a retirement fantasy. A floorboard creaked. Inside, the voices stopped. The door swung open. Justice Hale stood there, surprise flashing before authority snapped into place. "Captain Ward," he said sharply, "this area is restricted." Elias met his gaze. "I was looking for the clerk's office. I have evidence to submit, but it sounds like the verdict's already written." The air went cold. The attorney, a man in a tailored suit, smiled thinly. "Careful, Captain. You're a witness, not a judge." "Justice isn't for sale," Elias said. Hale's face darkened. "Get out, before you ruin your career." Elias left. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He walked away with his hands shaking and his resolve hardening into something dangerous. He didn't call his superiors. He didn't call the police. He called Sergeant Miles Ochoa. "Get the truck," Elias said when Ochoa answered, "and the people we trust." That night, the rain didn't stop. It washed the city clean, or tried to. Elias and 4 soldiers waited behind a shuttered factory, engines off, lights dark. They loaded magazines quietly. "This ends careers," Ochoa said. Elias nodded. "Or it starts something bigger." They knew the judge's routine. Private exit, black sedan, briefcase. The interception was clean until it wasn't. Floodlights ignited, sirens screamed. Military police poured in from both ends. Colonel Marcus Vane stepped forward, megaphone in hand, a smile he didn't bother to hide. "Captain Ward," Vane called, "you're under arrest." Elias looked at his men, outnumbered, boxed in. Then his phone buzzed. "Look up." On the rooftops, silhouettes, lasers. The balance shifted. "Stand down," Elias said calmly, "or this ends badly."
Vane hesitated. He knew the setup. He raised his hands. They took the judge. They took the briefcase. They ran. The safe house was supposed to be secure. It wasn't. Inside the case, cash, and beneath it a ledger. Names, dates, payments. The last signature froze Elias's blood. General Thomas Avery. His mentor, his protector, the man who'd vouched for him. The lights went out. Helicopter rotors thundered overhead. They escaped through sewage tunnels, breath ragged, hope thinning. Hours later, soaked and shaking, they hid beneath an unfinished overpass. The judge laughed weakly. "You can't win," he said. "He owns everything." Elias stared at the radio tower blinking in the distance. "Then we don't fight with guns," he said. "We fight with truth." The radio station was open, empty, waiting. Inside the broadcast room, General Avery sat calmly, explosives wired to the console. "Predictable," he said softly. "This system survives because men like me make ugly choices." Elias stepped forward. "You sold honor for comfort." Avery looked at the judge, sobbing on the floor. Disgust flickered. Seconds stretched. Avery set down the detonator. "Do it," he said. "Tell them everything." The red light blinked on. Elias spoke. He read the names, the amounts, the betrayals. Across the city, people listened. By dawn, crowds filled the streets, not with rage, but resolve. The judge and the general were led out in cuffs, in daylight, before the people they'd failed. Elias stood on the balcony, exhausted, uncertain of his future, certain of one thing only. Silence had lost. He wasn't powerful, not yet. But history had found him. If this story moved you, share it, subscribe. Because courage spreads and truth, once spoken, doesn't go back to sleep. The crowd didn't cheer at first. That surprised Elias. He had expected anger, shouts, fists in the air, maybe even stones. That's what every intelligence brief said happened when the truth finally came out. But instead, there was a low murmur that rolled through the streets like distant thunder. People standing shoulder to shoulder, processing what they had just heard. Mothers clutching radios, taxi drivers leaning out of windows, soldiers in uniform standing frozen, unsure whether to salute or arrest the man on the balcony. Then slowly someone started clapping, one set of hands, then another. It spread, not like an explosion, but like rain-soaking dry ground, steady, relentless. Elias felt his throat tighten. He hadn't done this for applause. He'd done it because the alternative was rot. But in that moment, as the sun crept above the skyline and lit the cracked concrete and rusted antennas, he understood something fundamental. Fear only works when people believe they're alone. Below him, Sergeant Ochoa stood rigid, scanning the crowd. "Captain," he said quietly, "we've got movement on the East Road, armored units."
Elias nodded. He had known this wouldn't end cleanly. The broadcast had gone out nationwide. That meant every power broker, every general with something to lose, every foreign interest that preferred stability over justice. They were all awake now, phones ringing, orders being written and erased. Inside the station, General Avery sat on a folding chair, hands zip-tied, staring at the floor. He looked smaller without his rank, without the certainty of command. Just an old soldier who'd made too many compromises and finally run out of excuses. "You know they'll come for you," Avery said without looking up. "They'll call this sedition, a coup attempt. They'll erase you if they can." Elias didn't respond. He was watching the crowd, watching soldiers in standard-issue fatigues slowly lower their rifles, unsure who they were meant to aim at anymore. A convoy of armored vehicles rolled into view at the far end of the boulevard, engines growling, turrets turning, the kind of show of force meant to remind people where power lived. The crowd tensed. Elias leaned into the microphone one last time. His voice carried, not loud, but clear. "I'm not asking you to fight," he said. "I'm asking you to remember. Remember these names, remember what they stole, and remember that no uniform, no title, no office is above the truth." He clicked the mic off and handed it to Ochoa. Outside, the first armored vehicle stopped. A lieutenant stepped out. Young, nervous. His hand hovered near his sidearm as he looked up at the balcony. For a moment, Elias saw himself, years earlier, believing the chain of command was unbreakable. The lieutenant raised a megaphone. "Captain Ward," he called, "by order of the Provisional Security Council, you are to surrender yourself immediately." The crowd stirred. Elias stepped forward, hands visible. "I will," he said, loud enough for those nearest to hear, "but not alone." He gestured behind him. Judge Hale was brought out next. Then General Avery, both pale, both exposed. "You take all of us," Elias continued, "in daylight in front of the people, or you turn around and leave." The lieutenant hesitated. He looked back at his convoy, at the cameras now appearing, phones raised, live streams already spreading across platforms, no government fully controlled anymore. This wasn't a tactical problem. It was a political one. Minutes dragged. Finally, the lieutenant lowered the megaphone. "Stand down," he said to his men, voice tight. "Hold position." A ripple of relief moved through the crowd, not celebration, something steadier, more dangerous. By noon, international media had picked up the story. Footage of the broadcast, screenshots of the ledger, commentary panels arguing whether Elias Ward was a hero or a criminal. In Washington, in Brussels, in places far from the rain-soaked streets of the capital, analysts spoke carefully about internal reforms and the need for stability.
Elias sat in a small holding room, hands uncuffed now, staring at a wall scarred with old tape marks and stains. A government lawyer came and went. A colonel asked procedural questions. Nobody threatened him anymore. That worried him more than the shouting ever could. Late in the afternoon, a civilian entered the room. Mid-50s, no uniform, calm eyes. "My name is Daniel Kerr," the man said. "I'm with the Transitional Oversight Committee." Elias almost laughed. That was fast. Kerr smiled thinly. Public pressure accelerates things. "So what happens now?" Elias asked. Kerr folded his hands. "Now we decide what to do with you." Elias met his gaze. "I didn't do this to be rewarded." "I know," Kerr said. "That's why this is complicated." They talked for an hour, about legality, about precedent, about how systems defend themselves by sacrificing individuals. Kerr didn't pretend otherwise. "You'll be discharged," he said finally, quietly, with honors on paper, restrictions in practice. "You won't hold command again, not officially." Elias nodded. He'd expected that. "But," Kerr continued, "the cases you exposed are moving forward. International observers, independent prosecutors. It won't be clean, it won't be quick, but it won't be buried." Silence stretched between them. "Was it worth it?" Kerr asked. Elias thought of the rain, the envelope, the red dots on his chest, the sound of clapping at dawn. "Yes," he said, "even if nothing changes tomorrow." because now they know we're watching. Weeks later, Elias walked out of the base for the last time. No ceremony, no band, just a duffel bag and a line of soldiers who found excuses to be nearby, to nod, to shake his hand. Outside the gate, Ochoa waited. "What now?" the sergeant asked. Elias looked up at the sky. Clear today, no rain. "Now," he said, "now we don't disappear." They drove into the city, past walls newly painted with slogans about justice and dignity, past markets buzzing with cautious optimism, past soldiers who saluted, not because they were ordered to, but because they wanted to. Elias Ward didn't become president. He didn't seize power. He didn't promise miracles. But something had shifted. In classrooms, law schools, barracks, people told the story of the night a judge took blood money, and one captain refused to stay silent. And once people hear a story like that, they start asking dangerous questions. If this story made you pause, share it, talk about it. Subscribe for more stories that remind us power only survives when truth stays quiet. Until next time, stay awake. The official reports would later reduce everything to numbers and footnotes. They would say the judge was detained pending investigation. They would say the general retired due to health concerns. They would say the captain violated protocol under extraordinary circumstances. What they would not say, what systems almost never say, is how close everything came to staying exactly the same.
Because after the cameras left, after the streets emptied, after the headlines moved on, pressure returned. Quiet pressure. The kind that doesn't shout, doesn't threaten openly. The kind that waits. Elias felt it in small ways at first. A bank account flagged for additional verification. A landlord suddenly unwilling to renew a lease. A job interview that ended politely but never called back. Power doesn't always crush you. Sometimes it just closes doors one by one and waits for you to give up. One evening, months later, Elias sat alone in a small apartment overlooking the river. The city looked calm from here, almost innocent. He listened to the radio, not news, just static and late-night music, and wondered if he had misjudged the cost. Then his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost ignored it. "Captain Ward?" a woman's voice asked. Older, steady. "Yes. My son was killed 3 years ago," she said. "Border incident. Wrong place, wrong time. The case disappeared." Elias closed his eyes. "I heard your broadcast," she continued. "I heard you say the truth doesn't belong to the powerful. Tomorrow I'm going to file again. I just wanted you to know I'm not afraid anymore." The line went dead. Elias sat there for a long time, phone still in his hand. That's how change really happens, not with applause, not with speeches, but with quiet decisions made by ordinary people who realize fear isn't permanent. In another part of the city, a young lieutenant removed a photograph of a general from his office wall. In a courthouse, a junior clerk copied files she'd once been told not to touch. In a military academy, a class discussion went off script when a cadet asked, "What do we do when the order is legal, but wrong?" No one credited Elias for those moments, and that was fine. History rarely rewards the first person who speaks, it rewards the echo. Years later, a journalist would ask him, off the record, whether he regretted it. The loss of rank, the stalled career, the isolation. Elias answered without hesitation, "I regret every moment I stayed silent before." Because silence, he had learned, is how corruption eats. Not loudly, not violently, but patiently. And truth, real truth, is rarely convenient. It costs comfort. It costs safety. Sometimes it costs everything except your conscience. The night a judge took blood money was not the night a nation collapsed. It was the night a lie stopped being comfortable. And all it took was one captain, unremarkable, replaceable on paper, who refused to look away. If you're watching this and thinking, "I'm not powerful," remember this. Neither was he. If this story made you reflect, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more documentary-style stories about courage, leadership, and the moments that quietly change history. Because the system counts on silence, and history is written by those who finally decide to speak.